Well, greetings to everyone. I hope this finds you well. I'll have you know that I'm a little more prepared this week than I was last week. All I could think about as I sat down to record last week was, don't cough in the middle of this. People are going to think you have corona. And sure enough, what happened about midway through the lesson, I got a little tickle in my throat, and I didn't have any water nearby, and so I had to cough. So I'm a little more prepared today. I've brought a little water here, so hopefully I won't have to do that. But I hate to get 3/4 of the way through the recording, cough, and think, oh, now I got to start over again. I don't really want to do that. So hopefully I'm a little more prepared for that today. I had originally hoped that when we decided to cancel services for 2 weeks, that pretty soon we would be able to come together and meet again. But as things look now, that's not going to be possible. For the next 30 days or so, and maybe longer, we are not going to be able to meet together as a congregation. And I don't know that anyone really knows beyond that. And yet, we count our blessings in the midst of this difficulty. At least in our particular time period, we do have this ability to connect in this way over the internet. Not too many years ago, none of this would have even been possible. So, we're making do with what we can, and I hope that you are encouraged by these lessons that come over the internet, even if we can't be together in person. Today, I want to reflect on a specific question with you. Since we are not really able to plan very far into the future at the moment, it seems reasonable to ask, what do you do when you can't plan for tomorrow? The book of James takes up that very question. James is known for taking much of his teaching from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And that should be no surprise to us, since James is the blood brother of Jesus. And if you remember, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus taught his disciples not to worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. The fact is, as Christian believers, we are supposed to be taking things one day at a time. And the reason that is the case is because we don't know what tomorrow will bring. Now, it is okay, of course, to make reasonable provisions for the future. But even as we do so, we do it knowing that we cannot trust in our own provisions, because we can only trust in the God who provides for us day by day. When we plan for the future, we always do so acknowledging if it is God's will. With that in mind, I want to read a famous passage to you from the book of James. Many of you will recognize it right away, but perhaps you will agree with me that in these strange days that we are living in, these words from James take on a whole new significance and meaning. So if you have a Bible nearby, I invite you to open it with me to James chapter 4 and verse 13. And if you don't, go ahead and hit pause on this video, go grab a Bible, and then once you've turned there, let's go ahead and read these few verses together. James chapter 4, beginning in verse 13. Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast and brag. All such boasting is evil. Anyone, then, who knows the good that he ought to do and doesn't do it, sins. Well, if you're like me, everything that you have planned for the next several months has now been thrown into complete disarray. I can't say that we had a lot of things planned between now and summer, but one thing that we were really looking forward to was taking a vacation as a family in July to go see Yosemite National Park in California, as well as taking a trip down to see the sequoia trees, which are a couple hours south of there. Because Luke is in the 4th grade this year, he gets a free pass for all of his family to enter into any of the national parks that he wants to go to. So, with that in mind, we thought, let's take this drive to California. Let's stop at some of the national parks in Colorado and Utah on the way, and just to make a big, 7-10 day trip out of the thing. Going to see beautiful sights is the way that our family prefers to vacation. Neither Oli or I are real keen on just going and laying around somewhere. I mean, that can be fun every now and then, but what we really like to do is to go and see things which enrich our lives. Nothing does that quite like seeing God's grand works of nature. Right before we moved here, we took our family to see the Grand Canyon. And then 2 years ago, we took a trip to Montana and Wyoming to see Yellowstone National Park. Those were great trips, and we were so looking forward to adding some more national parks to our experiences this summer. However, that doesn't look too likely to happen now. Hopefully, things with this virus will be cleared up by the month of July, but who knows what things are going to look like then. And even if everything is back to normal, I'm not sure that I'm really in the mood to spend the money needed for the trip until we figure out what the long-term implications of this crisis is going to be. So more than likely, our trip for this summer is going to be canceled. My guess is you also have had a change in plans for what you intend to do over the next few months. Yours may not have involved vacation. It may have involved something else. It's hard to even articulate all the ways that our lives have been interrupted by this whole crisis. But whatever the particular circumstance may be, it is very likely that what you planned over the next few months is not likely to take place. Well, with that in mind, all of this rumination leads me back to the question that I raised in the introduction. What do you do when you can't plan very far into the future? What do you do whenever you have no idea what tomorrow is going to bring? The truth is, we've never really been able to plan for tomorrow because we've never known for sure what tomorrow is going to bring. Now, we are very fortunate that because of the stability of our society and because of the relative wealth of our nation, we have been insulated from a lot of the daily interruptions of normal life. It's not always been that way. As a matter of fact, the kind of stability that we have grown used to is really quite unusual in the history of the world. When you go back in history, you don't have to go back very far to find people who were very vulnerable to a number of different factors. Poverty was much more widespread. War was a near constant. Sickness and disease left people crippled or dead. This has been the history of the world. Over the last number of years, we have been somewhat insulated from that because our society has achieved a level of wealth and stability that is really quite unique in the history of the world. And this is a great blessing. I'm not saying that we should feel guilty about this. I think it is the gift of God. However, because this is the only reality that most of us have known for decades now, we have grown to assume that stability is just the natural state of things. But it's not. And people in the ancient world had a much better grasp of this than we do today. It would not have come as a shock to the readers of the book of James that he insists that you can't make plans very far into the future. There is reasonable planning that everyone must do, but everything is dependent upon the will of the Lord, which is very much out of our hands. Why was James writing about this in his letter? Well, without going into too much needless detail about the overall background of the letter of James, there is a contrast that is going on throughout much of the letter about the different favors that wealth brings. In chapter 2, James rebukes his readers for giving favoritism to a wealthy person who comes into their worship assembly while giving preference to them over the poor. In chapter 5, James warns the rich that if they are abusive with how they use their money and treat their workers, the judgment of God will come upon them because of his special attentiveness to the needs of the poor and the oppressed. And so, this theme is a recurring one throughout James's letter. In the text that we read here today, James's focus is on a special temptation for those with financial means. Sometimes we can get so caught up in our plans for the future and how we are going to develop our business and to make more money and do all the things that are part of our life. We forget that the future is completely unknown. According to James, to assume that what we are going to be able to do in the future is going to come about, that's a certain kind of pride and even arrogance. Instead, he says, what we should be saying is, if it's the Lord's will, we will do this or that. Why is this his teaching? Again, because none of us know what tomorrow may bring, and if we put all of our energy and efforts into planning for the future, this can leave us unprepared spiritually if the future should change for the worse. Instead, we should make our provision for the future, but always with the understanding that we will only do so if it is the Lord's will, because we do not know what tomorrow may bring. Now, the question is, how does that apply to us? My point is not to focus too heavily on the theme of wealth. It is true that we live in a wealthy society, and among the members of our congregation, we fall in all different ranges on the income scale. So my purpose is not to focus on that. It perhaps is worth saying that wherever you may land on the wealth or income scale, we have all grown used to the relative stability of our society, and we benefit from that. We can't help but be formed in our thinking by that experience of the world. But my point today is to lead us back to the question that I opened with, which has been given particular urgency because of our crisis. We have all been reminded in this situation that we do not know what tomorrow is going to bring. And it is very likely, whether we're talking about your 401k or a potential job loss or being furloughed or other such things, that we've all been affected economically in ways that we could not have anticipated just 2 months ago. So, with all that being true, how do we press forward now that we have been reminded in a very severe way that we have no idea what tomorrow may bring? James answers this question in the final words of chapter 4. Look at verse 17. James says, "Anyone then who knows the good that he ought to do and doesn't do it, sins." Here is James's answer to what you should do whenever you can't plan for tomorrow. You should do the good that you know to do right now. James even ratchets it up one step further. To not do the good that you know to do right now is to sin. So here is the point that James is driving at. You can make reasonable plans for the future given the fact that you understand that the future may change and that it is all dependent upon the will of God. All that is fine. But one thing you must not put off until the future is the good that you know to do right now. To put that off, he says, is to sin. To say to yourself, I will do this good thing when I'm in a much better position, is to sin. The call of God upon our life is to do the good that we know to do right now. Several years ago, whenever I was doing my first round of spiritual direction. This was with a counselor during my time of depression. He gave me a devotional that I have been using for the last 8 years. The devotional comes from the book called The Sacrament of the Present Moment, written by an 18th century Frenchman named Jean-Pierre de Caussade. The devotional is actually from a full-length book, but my counselor had taken readings from each part of the book and made a 365-day devotional out of it, and each day has a little paragraph from the book. I've been going through that devotional every year now for the last 8 years, and it has been an immense blessing to my spiritual life. But the primary thing that Caussade teaches in his book is that spiritual growth comes from two things. There is an active element to our spiritual life and a passive element. The passive aspect of our life comes from accepting the daily challenges that God sends our way, which we really have no control over anyways. God uses these trials to mold us and discipline us into the kind of people that He desires us to be. But there is also an active element to spiritual growth. Along with keeping the general ethical teachings of the Bible, of course, there is a second active element to our spiritual development. According to Caussade, the most important thing we can do besides accepting passively whatever it is that God allows to come into our life, including suffering, is to do the duty of the present moment. According to Caussade, each moment of our life presents a duty for us. For a young mother or father, the duty of the moment may be changing the diaper of their baby. For an employee at work, it may be carrying out the tasks that the boss has asked of them. For someone who meets a hungry person on the street, it may mean buying them a meal. As you might imagine, there are just an infinite number of variables, but the point is this. Each moment presents us with an opportunity to do the good that is set before us at the present moment. And the way that we grow spiritually is to step up to the action that is required by the moment. In this way, along with the trials that God allows to come into our life, God molds us and shapes us spiritually to be the kind of people He has called us to be. All of this, I think, is very instructive to us in our present moment. We are living through a time whenever we cannot plan very far into the future. We don't know what tomorrow may bring, and we certainly don't know what the next month or the next year will bring. We're in very uncharted territory here. But there is something that we can know, and that is the duty of the present moment. What good is presenting itself before you right now to do? Whatever that is, that's God's will for your life at the moment. Who knows what you will have to do tomorrow, or the next month, or the next year? But what you can know is how to respond to the duty right in front of you. So, church, as we navigate these strange days together, I ask you to remember the wisdom that James brings to us. We don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. It's hard to plan very far into the future at the moment. But really, we have simply been reminded of what has always been true. We will do this or that if it is God's will. And all we really have is today. But speaking of today, there is some good for you to do. Whatever that good is, even if it's as simple as staying at home so that you don't risk spreading the sickness, this is God's will for you in the present moment. Do the good you know to do today, and then let tomorrow worry about itself. May God bless you in this next week.